Now for patterns, that's the same thing. It's like, I'm gonna have you, as an assignment, find a whole bunch of patterns that you personally like. You're gonna look at old architecture, Art Nouveau, or more geometric things, or psychedelic mandalas, whatever. Get patterns on this, and you yourself decide what you think looks generic and what looks interesting to you. And you ask yourself, well, there are places that you can use generic for. It has its place. But there's also opportunity in things that are more unique. And any pattern that exists can be simplified down to geometry. It's your job to grab the patterns that you think are cool, that you can start iterating on and mixing together. You just look at the simple shapes first. Obviously there's circles and they're spaced away from each other, and you could just do a very loose version of this. And then you can pick a different color and say, okay, what other very simple shapes are there? Okay, there seems to be a cross, something happening here. And then there seems to be something up over here, resolves itself into a point. And then if you really want to get complex with it, then you use that as your layout to try to figure out the specifics of the overlap and say, okay, well, I'm not gonna do the full detail thing here, but you know, there's this overlapping like that, overlapping like this. And you have this kind of thing going on. And so if you do that careful study once, you can go off and do your own thing that's sort of a similar situation where you have maybe it resolves outward like this, and then you have overlapping things in the middle, and maybe you have your own interpretation of how they happen here. That's how I would recommend doing a study for the patterns that you like. Now, granted, this isn't a very specific tutorial on how to do that, but I think you get the picture. So what I do for certain patterns, so if I have like a belt or something, I'll do, I don't know, circles that are overlapping, and then, I don't know, pick some random points. Maybe I could say that a line goes through all of them like this, and wherever that intersects on these, I could connect those with another curve, right? Or I could pick wherever it intersects at the top over here, and I just do a curve shape to the right. And any pattern that you repeat like that, just by looking at points, will have a cohesiveness like that. And that's what I would recommend trying to find with this kind of reference. But anything can be broken down to simple geometry is what I'm saying. I think render quality, that's just going to be a matter of painting and developing your mileage with painting and conveying form, which I do cover in the Meds Map course, but I think you're at a pretty good place of conveying form. It just feels that it could be simplified. Like it doesn't have a clear simplified value group structure. Like it gets a little bit muddy here. So what I could do is make a new layer, set that to darken to sort of flatten out all the high values, and ask myself, like, do I really need all that brightness everywhere? And say that, well, if we know that a sphere is gonna have a core shadow, if there's top light or top left, there's a shadow area, and there's a mid-tone area, and then a highlight or a hotspot highlight, and then you can kind of shade that, maybe get some bounce light in there. But these areas should kind of feel pretty distinct, and the head is pretty round. So this very clearly delineated area of highlight, I want that to be very clearly done here. So in that case, I put a mask on it, and grab that airbrush and erase out only the necessary areas. Right? Now it actually seems like the three-dimensional form is adhering to the geometry. But if I turn it off, it's kind of jarring. And then you could kind of settle somewhere in between the two. From there, also consider that I can go into these areas that are in shadow and probably reduce, and this is just a personal style for me, reduce the amount of visual activity. Although if it is a concept, maybe you don't have to, but for me personally, I would probably take attention away from these areas because they're not as important as the other focal points, such as around the eyes. One last thing that I would add for the rendering here is the addition of ambient occlusion. So let's say for the sphere, it might cast a shadow like this. There's also a ambient light situation that's coming in that's going to make the shadow not completely black, but anywhere that this ambient light is not hitting, there's going to be occlusion. So like a dark little soft area of shadow. To put it simply, over here in your design, you could say a very subtle indication of ambient occlusion in these shadow areas. And it'll really help kind of show three-dimensionality. And it's very efficient, very quick, to the point. And I'm just using the lasso tool and laying in just pure black. It's almost like a drop shadow. but not quite, because this is more of an occlusion rather than direct cast shadows. All right, so now I can turn that off. We can see the difference. It's gonna flatten out and not feel as three-dimensional. It's flattened out. Now it's a little bit more three-dimensional. So we could lower the opacity a little bit on that shadow. And if I turn this off, you'll notice the very, I'd say, clean presentation here compared to the jarring situation that we have there. So that's not to say that he can't have, you know, wrinkles and details and stuff, but it's the value groups that kind of stood out to me as being jarring. That same treatment, by the way, you could do everywhere for more simplicity or simplification of the forms. For example, this whole round chest area, like we know the geometry. We could just take that and pull it over here and say, okay, well, how do you render a sphere or something in that shape? Very simple. We have, like that sphere we made earlier. Done. It looks three-dimensional. We can add some of that bounce over here. But notice the difference is that here the value kind of just stays pretty consistent, and to show form you're going to have a transition from value to a highlight. So we can grab that highlight color, maybe put it there like that, and maybe it's more of an egg shape. Sure, take it and stretch it like that. But now all we got to do is put those delineations. It's essentially just a wireframe that goes on the form of it, and then you could do that stuff with the curve there, and then you can take some of that highlight and let it catch into some of these little areas. But in terms of rendering, the efficiency comes with the simplicity of the geometry that you're painting. So you can put it over here, and already we can zoom out and feel the form more effectively. Let's go ahead and actually just mask it off into those areas so that it makes more sense. And it's a subtle change, but that feeling of the form is what's missing. It's the willingness to define what that form is and be bold with it.